All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome. My name's Leo. I'm here with my colleague Sung. Sung, do you want to say hello?
Yeah. What up, folks? My name is Sung. I'm a solutions engineer at Datafold, just like Leo. Fun fact: I used to work at DBT Labs. So if you have any DBT questions, feel free to reach out because I know there's that overlapping crowd here. But really excited to talk about replication and all that fun stuff today with cross database diffing. So yeah, and I'll also be in the chat just moderating that. And so if you have any questions, I'll make sure to answer them async or bring them up to Leo to the public crowd if that makes more sense to answer that question. All right, with that in mind, I'll give the spotlight back to Leo.
Thanks, Sung. So yeah, Sung will be the chat champ today. If anything's going wrong from a technical standpoint, please either Sung will jump in and start yelling at me, or you all should yell at Sung in the chat. Um, Full disclosure, I'm on one monitor today, so I'm kind of fingers crossed that everything's working. And just let me know if not, and I'll jump into it here. So again, welcome. We're going to talk about Datafold Cloud, some of our pretty exciting new features that I'm excited about. I hope you are too. Also, some of our old standbys, kind of bread and butter features. Yeah, so let's start with a little agenda, intro and pleasantries. I hope this has been pleasant so far. And then we'll talk about data diffing, which is really at the core of what we do. Um, I'll be introducing our replication testing functionality, and that'll be for validating that ETL pipelines or data replication between databases is working. Um, I'll do a little demo, walk through various aspects of what I intro here, and then Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat in the meantime. Um, if anything's really relevant to what's going on the screen, Sung will jump in, or maybe he'll be able to handle them in the chat. Um, I also want you all to, feel comfortable, introduce yourselves if you want to say something about where you're from and where you're at. I'm here in Eugene, Oregon. That's where the University of Oregon and the Ducks are. And yeah, I'll just do quick intro here. I'm Leo, as I mentioned, here in Eugene, and these are some of the places I've spent my career, mostly as a data analyst. And I got interested in Datafold because we do a kind of data testing that I'm really excited about, and I found was missing pretty much from the industry. And then, of course, our chat champ, Sung, just introduced himself, and here's a picture of him. And so let's jump into the content. Great. So what is a data diff? What, why, when? I try to kind of talk through all these. So this is a data diff. So let's just kind of walk through this, and maybe some alarm bells or light bulbs are already going off in your head. Hopefully, if not yet, they will throughout this session. So a data diff is a value level comparison of two data tables. The assumption here is the data tables will have a similar structure, and you're checking to see if they match. Or maybe you're checking to see if they match in all ways except for the ways you expect them to be different. So here you can see on the left, there's a primary key, org ID. And then you have, in this example, there are two columns. Of course, you might have hundreds of columns, but trying to keep it simple on my small screen. And then, of course, each row represents a primary key. And for each primary key, you can see the data in table A versus table B. So you see here null shifting to individual. Perhaps it's null in your legacy database and it's individual in your new one that you're moving from, let's say, SQL Server to Snowflake. Here you have these little differences in timestamps, or not so little differences. And so why are there differences? Any number of reasons. It could be a failed ETL job. It could be an intended change based on updated logic. I'll get into some more examples, but the key thing I'm really hoping resonates and sticks in your mind here is that to get this level of granularity, you really need to line up the data based on common primary key to see the differences. And this is much like a Git diff. So when you're comparing code two versions of code. Why do you want to see differences in two versions of code? Well, to make sure that the new version is only different in the ways you want it to be. We should be doing the same when working with data. Why should you data diff? You might have a board meeting, and it's really important that the numbers are right and that they're not different in some ways that you are unable to explain. I've been in that situation where I was preparing for a board meeting or a customer presentation, and the numbers didn't match up, and I couldn't figure out why, and I didn't have a good way of investigating. Being able to line them up next to each other really makes it clear if there's an error and where it's from. Maybe you're in the midst of a migration and you want to make sure that that can be completed on schedule and that your stakeholders trust that the new data is what their products, their dashboards, and their business decisions can depend on. If they don't trust the new system, they'll never be able to shut down the old. Finally, you might have a data-driven product. Customers might be using that data. Maybe your AI software or your self-driving car is depending on that data. Maybe healthcare decisions are depending on the data being correct. So if a failed ETL job or some SQL error causes the data to be different in some unexpected way, you want to know that as soon as possible. So when should you data diff? I've kind of talked about why, but we can get into more of the nuts and bolts of where this plugs in. So that might be testing code changes in CI when you're updating a SQL script. Instead of just looking at the git diff, you can compare two versions of the data, migrating from legacy to new. So we work with a number of customers who are in the midst of these large migrations. They might have data diffs triggered by REST API to check that the entire system matches, or they might be going through table by table, looking at a UI, kind of like I showed you a couple of slides ago, and I'll get into a demo of that. And finally, your ETL jobs that are running on a continuous basis. Datafold can be plugged in to those jobs to validate that the data in an upstream database matches that in your warehouse. I am definitely not thinking of all the scenarios where someone might data diff. Data diffing is a tool, but how and where and when you use it is going to depend on your business needs, your technical stack, and what really matters for you and your data organization. So I created this poll in LinkedIn. I didn't post it, but I used the interface. And the question is, how are you avoiding production data incidents? Select all that apply. The two options are many hours of testing and we are not avoiding them. And perhaps one or both apply. Feel free to reply in the chat if you have your own answer. I should have added a third option to say other. But I bring this up because sometimes people are really focused on use Datafold to avoid production incidents. And that is a good reason and a reason many people use Datafold and look at data diff results. But some of the teams that get the most value out of Datafold are actually able to remove hundreds, thousands of hours of person hours of work to avoid data incidents. They're at an organization where a data error is essentially unacceptable, could be catastrophic, and so they actually have ways of avoiding them, but it's incredibly labor intensive. And so we are in the business of actually automating much of that process. Okay, so I will walk through a little bit more of, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause here and do kind of part one of the demo, and then I'm going to walk through this data replication use case, which is our the thing that we actually launched yesterday and are pretty excited to share with you. All right, so I'm going to pull up a couple of different screens here. The first one is data diffing in CI. So you might have a code repo, you might use dbt or Airflow, Dagster, anything to automate your data transformation pipelines. And I'm going to walk through the process of updating that repo, updating that SQL code with a pull request and how Datafold fits in. So I hope this looks somewhat familiar to you. You have a SQL file in a repo, and it defines some kind of business logic. Like here, this is a simple dim orgs file. So you might have your facts and your dims. Down here, you have this sales sync model. So who knows what the sales team does with that, but it seems like they might sync. So in the current state, you might have the ability to review this PR by looking at the code differences, the git diff. You might be able to review any detailed, elaborate notes that your teammate, like our friend Sung here, has written to try to provide context. It's very hard to review code by just looking at the code without some kind of explanation of why this change is being made, what this data is used for, etc. So we can review the git diff, we can look at the code change. What Datafold does is it puts the data diff right in front of you. So what we see here is not only do you have that code context, that human written context, but you can see exactly what changes between your main branch and your feature or PR branch. There are two columns with differing values, and this is the number. You also have data apps that might have an impact as a result of these code changes. So Datafold does integrate with a number of downstream BI apps like Looker and Tableau. And we do that using our column level lineage, which I will also pull up in a moment. So every single data table or DBT model in your pull request is going to be analyzed similarly. In this case, there are no differences between the main branch except for a row count. So you can see here, this kind of summarizes attributes that are unchanged. And then up here, there is actually a, or I'm sorry, I misspoke here. There is a row count difference and there is a difference in the exclusive primary keys, but there are no value level differences. So I'll walk through that in the Datafold app and you'll see more what I mean. So the idea here is we're putting this summary right in front of you so that you don't have to click out of GitHub. You can just, essentially it's an enhancement to the code review process. If you click into Datafold, you can then look at the detailed value level comparison. So this is that link that was put right in GitHub, and you can see here something quite similar to what I showed you in that previous slide, which is the primary keys and any values that changed, as well as any rows that were missing or added. So just to put a finer point on this, an assertion test or a DBT test that checks for accepted values, for null values, for unique values, for values within a certain range, they're not going to catch something like this. So you actually have, like, the majority of rows in this table have some kind of data change. If you are testing that these are valid timestamps, that test will pass. If you're testing that there's a value in every row, the test will pass. And if you're testing that the values are in the year 2022, the test will pass. But there's no way to test that this particular primary key has this particular value. That's just not something that an assertion test that checks for a known unknown will do, right? So we're testing for unknown unknowns, like how is the data changing in some way that you never would be able to imagine or define ahead of time. Another way of thinking of it is if my first name Leo was in one of these columns and it changed to Leo Leo, well, there's no test that checks that my first name is actually my first name. But at least with Datafold, you would be able to see a lot of these first names are changing. First names don't usually change, so that might be a problem in our pipeline once this code is merged. So that's the idea of this proactive data testing in CI. There are a couple of other tabs here that I didn't focus on, but just to give you kind of help get you oriented in the application. This is a little bit more detail in the high level column summary. So you've got your data types, your status, and then that downstream impact. I'm gonna highlight just Snowflake and Looker here. you can see this is the table that was modified in the pull request, and these are the downstreams. So you can see here, these are all the columns that could possibly be impacted by the changes that we see in the pull request. So if you click on, looks like that one doesn't connect back up, but if you look on org ID, you can see how that connects to dim orgs. If you look at yearly subscribers, you can follow that up. And then finally, if you look at these looker views and dashboards and explores, you can see how those filter up. So all of this is based on column level lineage, which you can also view right here as a visual graph. So the idea here is if you have a data change that doesn't impact any downstream, then you'll know very confidently. If you have a downstream dashboard that's critical to your business operations, that will appear in your downstream impact tab when you run a data diff. Great, so I think I'm going to go back to walk through this replication testing use case, because that does, I would say that does cover a lot of the other things I want to touch on in the live demo. So kind of mixing things up, breaking the demo up. Hopefully this is all making sense so far. Great, so data replication. What I've talked about mostly so far is data diffing in general, and then how this fits into CI if you're managing your ETL pipeline. What we have been investing a lot in at Datafold in the last 6 months is cross-database diffing and how that can really transform your data quality processes and highlight problems that you may not have had a way of testing for, or you may not have had a way of testing for efficiently or at scale. So here you can kind of see this classic use case of moving data from Postgres or another transactional database into a data warehouse. But we see organizations constantly moving data between databases. There's all kinds of reasons. You might have a application that depends on multiple upstream sources. There might be some legacy system that is still being replicated and it's not going to be shut down for whatever reason. There's endless reasons why data moves between databases. And the crazy thing is that we really have not, until recently, I would say, until Datafold has rolled this out, had a way of checking whether that replication is actually working, other than something crude, like a row count comparison, or a heavy network load as you move data around to actually compare it in one place using SQL, right? So Datafold is comparing this data without using SQL. So I touched on a bit of this already, but there's myriad reasons why data is replicated. I think I've already addressed most of them. A couple that I didn't say is you might have an ML or an AI team who's building models and they need their own database. And so they're using maybe a read replica that then gets replicated again to something like Snowflake or Databricks. You might have if you're at a large enterprise or if you're working with a large enterprise, data might need to be moved from one AWS region to another in order to comply with regulations or comply with, maybe latency is a concern. And so that replication is occurring to keep the data closer to the actual application server. So there's a number, again, myriad reasons. You probably have your own reasons for replicating data that I have not mentioned. Replication pipelines break. It might be that your ETL tool breaks. Sometimes there might be an outage. It might also be that the tool didn't break, but some assumption was not valid. Maybe you have your pipeline configured to exclude rows in a certain range, and that that logic failed for some reason. That's not the tool's fault. It's not your fault. It's just you need to know when that doesn't work. Custom engineering. I'm sure you've all been involved in wrapping your own home-baked tools. And sometimes they can work very well, but the reality is it's not the same as having enterprise support for a tool. It's almost inevitable that a home-baked tool will have some kind of um, unique person who is responsible, and they might be on vacation. Upstream breaking changes. Again, this is another scenario where it's not that your tool broke, it's not that your pipeline or even your process broke, but something changed about some upstream system, whether it's the application or the schema of the upstream database, and that will cause the data not to load for whatever reason in the expected way into your downstream database. I'm sure there will be more reasons that replication pipelines break in the future, which we all have yet to discover. Why don't we know right away when these problems occur? Many ETL tools don't have native testing or rigorous testing. They don't, thinking back to that data diff, hopefully this is starting to be clear why the data diff underlies everything that I'm talking about. If you could, and you can, as I'm about to show you, if you could compare every single value in your upstream system to your downstream system, then you would be able to say, yes, they match, or no, they don't. Assertion tests, as I mentioned, only check known unknowns. So that might be the volume of rows moved, the total, the sum of some column. Even a checksum would not catch if values were swapped in a couple of rows. So there's a lot of kind of optimism around saying, yes, the pipeline's good, nothing's broken, by using something like a row count and a checksum. And finally, you might have found yourself in a situation where this kind of testing just doesn't exist. We're all trying to move fast and build great stuff, and sometimes corners are cut. That's just the reality. And so having a testing tool like that actually checks every value is a force multiplier. So back to Datafold. Not that we strayed far. We are out here trying to spread the word that we have a solution for replication testing. So Datafold monitors, basically the way it works, and I'll walk through this in the app, is you can set up a scheduled diff between databases. So it's a little small here, but you can see Databricks to Snowflake. What it will do is run a diff and then notify you using one of these systems, so PagerDuty, email, webhooks, Slack, if the results are out of the ordinary based on a threshold that you set. So that might be a number of rows with differences, or it might be a percentage of rows with differences, and we have a few other options for alerting coming out. So you can see here, I'll show you this live in a moment, but this screenshot basically shows you a recurring alert that you can see here. This is the section where you would have been notified that these differences far exceeded a threshold. And then you can see here, someone, in this case it was me, was quickly moving to mitigate that problem. And we're here now back to an acceptable range. So you should know as soon as something like this happens. You should not have to wait until it shows up on a dashboard, or a customer complains, or it's been happening for weeks before someone notices, or even hours. This diffing can be performed at scale. We've been really excited to ship some improvements to our diffing algorithm, which you may have heard about if you follow us on social. But this enables companies who are doing this continuous replication for whatever reason to get results fast, to limit the impact on their compute spend, and just hammer the use case of checking to make sure things match and knowing as soon as they don't. Great, so this appears to be my final slide, which means I'm going to hop back into the Datafold application. I'll show you a little bit more about how this replication testing looks in the real world, and then hopefully answer any questions that have popped up. So with all of that preamble, it's actually pretty simple. You essentially can create a monitor the same way you create a diff, which I realize I probably should also show you how to create a diff in the app, but I'll just focus on monitors here and not get distracted. So I just click create new monitor. You can see here, basically you can select a data source between whether it's within a database or between. In most cases, we're thinking you'll probably be diffing between databases. And then there's a number of options here around materializing inputs in order to hold the data stable while you execute the diff. So that can be pretty important. You can add filters just like a SQL filter. You can add a column pair to map between two columns. So let me actually, I'm not going to create a monitor now, but I'll try to at least show you basically the way this works. And then I'll show you one of that live monitor and how to investigate the data. But I am populating this just so you can see. If we select similar table, there we go. That'll just allow me to select columns here. So if you did have like a column name change, you would want to be able to create a mapping. So you might have in your upstream created at and your downstream created underscore at. So that comes up pretty often when validating parity. So we do have also some safety features in here, if you will, an egress limit, just to prevent excessive data moving over the network in case there's like differences in every single value. And along the same lines, a per column diff limit, which I'll show you in a second. And that allows you to check to get results as soon as they're available without churning through an entire table if, again, there are differences in every value. I'll show you a real example of this. It'll make it, I think, more clear. So you can select all columns or specific columns, and then you can also materialize those results into the database for further investigation. Finally, these are those thresholds that I mentioned earlier. So essentially, this tells Datafold when to notify you if there's a number of different rows or a percentage of different rows that exceeds your threshold. And then you can configure a notification just like this. So I have Slack and email set up, but I mentioned there's also PagerDuty and webhooks. So that is, leave without saving, get rid of that. And then let's look in this monitor that I configured a few days ago. Had a little data incident. And so this is that screenshot that I showed you earlier, but in the wild. So just to walk through those settings that I shared, you can see here I've set up data source, selected a table, set my egress and per column diff limit. Again, I'll get back to what that means in a moment. Excluded a few columns that had sensitive data that I didn't want to share or like have visible in Datafold. And then I've set my threshold as well as my notifications. So let me actually click test run. So the idea here is you can run a diff just to make sure that your monitor is working the way you want, and you can see that running. So that'll be done in a moment. But let me walk through what these results look like. So again, these are essentially just scheduled diffs, but they're cross database and they have notifications configured. So if you look at this data diff, which was setting off all my bells and whistles the other day, you can see all of these differences. For whatever reason, BigQuery changed to BQ. So it couldn't be more clear in the results. And you can also see any primary keys that are exclusive to one or the other data set. So I hope this is starting to resonate. We're just really hammering data diff is a value level comparison. We find different values, we find missing data, added data, and we just make it clear as day what that is. We do this in your pull request for your transformation code, but we also do this for your ETL processes. And in all of these cases, the goal here is to get you the information as soon as possible so you can make good decisions based on it. Now, let's see. I think I lost that test run, to be honest, when I left the page. The test runs are transient. So sorry, I meant to show you that, but I'll show you one more live diff in a moment. So let me go back to where we were. So this was where I found that issue. And if you look at these high level statistics, you can see rows with different values, basically 0, 0, 0, all of a sudden a lot. And then I went and fixed the issue back down to 0. You'll also notice that for a while here, there were 5 primary keys exclusive to Postgres and 2 exclusive to Snowflake. And I do expect there to be some primary keys exclusive to Postgres because the replication does take some time. There's a bit of a lag. But these 2 exclusive to Snowflake, that doesn't seem right, at least in my little environment. And so you can see that is also something I was able to correct, and I want to see this at 0. So when I open this diff, you can see now we're back to a state that I want to be in. There are 5 different rows. All of those different rows are attributed to exclusive primary keys in Postgres. If I want to see what those are, I can browse. I look at values, I can see nothing found. If I look at columns, I get a little bit more of a high-level summary. So there is this column that was not diffed. And let me actually show you, this is a good way of showing you how this works in real time. So it looks like when I set up the monitor, I actually failed to map some conflicting column names. So you've got version to app version. And I hope you will believe me, because it's true, that this is a very authentic demo where I actually didn't notice this before, and now I'm going to run a diff where I map version to app version. Now I actually want to include this column. I'm not going to materialize the results, but if I did, then they'd be stored in Snowflake. And I think this should take just a few seconds. So, Sung, I invite you to come back because I pretty much am wrapping up what I meant to share. And maybe if there's anything that did come up in the chat, we can chat about that while this diff runs.
No, nothing coming in the chat except some math is typing right now. So we'll see.
Just people blown away by data diffing.
Yeah, dude, Leo,
Speechless.
you did a great job. Yeah.
Well, it's not me. It's this fantastic machine that I get to be at the wheel of.
Yeah,
All right.
dude. You blew
So
those socks off.
I just clicked that data diff button. So yeah, this is now you can kind of see. You might have mentioned that unmatched name in the previous result. Now, if you look at the columns tab, this is one of my personal favorite features. Honestly, you can see. Let me do this. I think this should say amp version, so I think that we probably need to fix that so it actually matches it up. But trust me, please, that they are mapped. And so yeah, that's the basic idea, that you would be able to, and you are able to map any conflicting column names, because that is like a constant thing in data replication and migration. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. And yeah, I'm not sure if anyone ended up sending anything in the chat, but I encourage you all to ask any questions you have here. Others benefit if you speak up and ask what's on your mind. On the other hand, let's chat if you do want to set up time to explore some of this more and see how it might fit in your data infrastructure.
Yeah. You should just put that in the chat, Leo, that Calendly link. And then while you're doing that, let me mention this question aloud. You mentioned on the problems with using ETL tools and migrating data. How are we solving those same problems using Datafold, or is it the benefit of having data diff? We can figure out the data issues. I think you answered your own question, which is great, which is, data diff will help verify those things. If it's like replicating things from using 5-chain from Postgres to Snowflake, for example, most of the time, um, those differences will be caused by a data lag for whatever reason, right? Just because of like maybe you have it set on hourly versus every 15 minutes as a simple example. But that may be critical to you to understand if, hey, should we run the rest of our pipeline after this extract and load step if we're having incomplete records, right? And so, Leo, any color you want to add there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. We are solving the problem of you not knowing that there are problems. You will be able to be the boots on the ground and hands-on solving um, any ETL issues that do exist. But what we are finding when working with customers is that people are unable to see that there are ETL problems for hours or days before it's understood why the data isn't matching up or um, some pipeline is broken. So yeah, I think like that's just a huge gap in the tooling right now is some way of knowing for sure um, that that data doesn't match up between database A and B. Cool. Well, I think we can probably wrap up a little early then. So thank you all for joining.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your you all sticking with me through my little presentation, asking you know uh, good question, and hopefully stimulated some other thoughts and questions that we'd be love to follow up on as you absorb this. So thanks again.
All right. Very, very cool.
All right, have a good one.
Bye bye now.